Welcome to History File, the Soviets. This is the first of 2 units tracing the rise and fall of the Soviet Union. A second unit, the Cold War, completes the 10-program series. The Soviets explores the fall of Tsarism and leads through to Stalin's development and testing of the atom bomb following World War II. The programs contain a dramatic blend of archive footage, reconstructions and documentary evidence, maintaining a clear focus on the turbulent relationship between Communist Russia and the West.
(1917), the Russian capital, Petrograd. A small group of soldiers, sailors, and factory workers storm the Winter Palace. Shown here, later restaged for the cameras, the event became a symbol of the Russian Revolution, the end of the old order. But what for some was seen as an explosion of hope, for others was a catastrophe.
A great country has been taken over by crime and lawlessness. Outrages forced on a defenseless people. All honor, all duty stifled. Everything noble destroyed.
Prince Felix Yusupov was one of those many aristocrats forced to flee Russia after the revolution. To the Bolsheviks who'd taken over, these people were the enemy. Rich landowners who'd lived, they thought, for too long off the fat of peasants and workers. Those that failed to escape were killed in their thousands. Amongst them, the Tsar, Emperor of Russia, and his family, shot in a cellar in Ekaterinburg in August 1918. Later, in exile in Paris, Yusupov wrote his version of the events that led to the Tsar's fall. This program reconstructs that account. Central to Yusupov's version of the story are the Tsar and Tsarina themselves, Nicholas and Alexandra. At his coronation in 1886, Nicholas had put the crown on his own head, no one else being worthy to do so. He'd inherited an empire covering 1/6 of the world, 125 million people, over whom his word was law. As a child, Felix used to play at Tsarskaya Selo, the Tsar's summer palace.
I remember, from my earliest days, thinking of them as a people apart, different from everyone else, and beyond criticism, like beings of a higher order. If anyone said the merest thing against them, it shocked me, and I'd flush with anger.
The Romanov family had ruled Russia for 300 years, and few had questioned their right to do so. The church taught the peasants to call the Tsar their little father. This was a backward, traditional, superstitious country. But the trouble with autocracy, the absolute rule of one man, is that it puts great pressure on that one man to deliver. And even Yusupov admits Nicholas had his failings.
He was weak, to put it bluntly. He worked hard and with great determination, but he was shy, only really comfortable in military circles. He never really got to know his country, and his country didn't know him.
In 1916, 1 year before the revolution, Yusupov was training as an officer cadet in the Tsarist army. A prince of Imperial Russia, his family was amongst the richest of the ruling elite. Their palace in Petrograd, the Moika, was just one of 35 palaces they owned across the empire. Felix himself was something of an eccentric, a poseur. All his life he'd loved dressing up in outrageous costumes. But by 1916, married to the Tsar's niece Irina, he'd vowed to put his riotous youth behind him. Because to him it seemed already obvious some catastrophe was hanging over Russia. The bond between ruler and ruled slipping away. Miles to the west, the First World War was just into its third year. Already millions were dead or wounded. But just as damaging as the German guns were the stories doing the rounds of incompetent generals, of treason in high places. Morale, like the army itself, was being shot to pieces.
It's not surprising. Riposte. We send them over the top without rifles. Coupe. We say, when he falls, pick up the rifle of the man in front. Or we give them rifles, but no ammunition.
So what are they saying?
They just want to be sure everything possible's been done for them. But there are rumors. I don't like to say it, Felix. I know how it hurts you when you hear ill of His Majesty.
Yusupov was used to unquestioned respect being shown the ruling classes. Instead, it seemed they were becoming a laughingstock. People said they were out of touch, more interested in themselves than in the common soldiers fighting at the front. Even the German-born Tsarina was accused. People whispered she had divided loyalties, or worse, that she was a German spy. There was no truth to the rumors, but such disrespectful gossip hurt Yusupov deeply. He agonized as to why the people's trust in the ruling elite was ebbing away. And he found a scapegoat, someone to blame, in a peasant faith healer called Grigory Efimovich Rasputin. So who was this Rasputin? He's been immortalized since in countless B-movies as a power-hungry wizard who controlled the Tsarina with some magic or sexual spell. As history, it's mostly nonsense. But Yusupov came to believe it was Rasputin, no one else, who brought down the old order. It makes his story at least worth closer examination.
This peasant, this moujik, in his greasy boots, entering the palace, traipsing about on the imperial marble. With those greasy boots, he trampled on the people's ancient faith in the purity and justice of the Tsar.
The private tragedy of the Romanov family was the sickness of their only son, Alexis, with a disease of the blood. Doctors feared he'd never live to inherit the throne. Partly in desperation, partly because she too was superstitious, Alexandra had turned to Rasputin to help the boy. Known since as a mad monk, he was in fact neither, just a wandering holy man with some unexplained skill that seemed to pull Alexis back from the brink. He'd become a frequent visitor to the royal nursery. But with Alexandra, he was on his best behavior. What others saw was his wilder side.
Listen to this. Rasputin came home drunk at 5 a.m. Maria Gilles, wife of a captain in the Hussars, slept over at Rasputin's. During the visit of the Pitolkor family, Rasputin took a prostitute on his knee and whispered in her ear.
Where did you get them?
The policeman on guard at his flat kept notes. He sold them on the black market. This man sidled up to me outside. He said these would tickle my palate. He said there are photographs too. Orgies. Aristocratic ladies involved.
He was turning them into a laughingstock, the Tsar and Tsarina. That they should let such an immoral man twist them round his finger. The Tsar was at the front. She'd sent him these messages full of Rasputin's orders. People began to say, he rules Russia through her. There'd been some business of a letter she'd written talking of her love for him, for Rasputin. Quite innocent. But the letter was stolen. People said she's having an affair. Soldiers are dying in their thousands, and she's having an affair.
Rasputin's importance lies not in what he did, but in what people said he did. The affair with Alexandra was lies. Equally, it's debatable how great his influence really was. But ordinary Russians heard how he could make and unmake ministers. It seemed to explain the recent muddle. 5 interior ministers in just 10 months. 3 different ministers for war. People said, is this stupidity or is this treason? Yusupov resolved to stop the rot. He went to bribe or frighten Rasputin to leave the court, but it was no use.
He didn't need money. He gave away most of what he had, and he seemed immune to any threat. I'd arranged my meeting through an old friend, Marie Golovin, one of those ladies of the court now obsessed with this fake. I said to her, if you love him, you must urge him to leave. He is in danger. He is in danger. She said,
he has no reason to fear.
Someone will kill him, sooner or later.
No, God would not allow it.
Go into the other room. I want to talk to him alone.
As for Rasputin, he was even more sure of himself than she was. Puffed up with this intolerable arrogance.
Sit. You shouldn't be afraid of me, you know. When you come to know me better, you'll see what kind of man I am. I can do anything. And if the Tsarina obeys me, well, surely you can. I'll be seeing her soon. I'll tell her you've been to see me. It'll please her. Maybe make you a minister. Would that amuse you?
You think you can? Make me a minister?
Oh, it's a simple thing. The Empress is very wise. With her, I can do anything. As for him, Nicky, well, he's a child of God. He ought just to play with the children or potter in the vegetable garden, not rule the country. That's a little difficult. Yeah, and so we help him, with God's blessing.
I can tell you, it almost made me physically sick to hear how this peasant horse thief spoke of the Emperor of Russia. To think this man stood so close to the throne at a time of such need. It seemed to me I had no option but to take extreme measures to deliver Russia from this evil man.
Was Yusupov right to blame Rasputin for all Russia's problems? Or had he ignored more deep-rooted issues pulling Russia apart? Beyond the Moika, there had existed for centuries a gulf between rich and poor. Yusupov, with his private train, his theatre, his oil fields, lived a life a world removed from the peasants that worked his estates. 50 years before, these mujiks had been serfs, objects he could have bought or sold, living only to work his land. Now serfdom was abolished, but still these people had little. They scratched the soil with wooden plows, grew rye and oats, lived on a diet of cabbage soup. In the cities, Russia's backwardness was just as obvious. Unlike in Western Europe, where 100 years of industrial growth had created a reasonably settled workforce, here industry was new and primitive. Unions were banned. There was no right to strike, no legal means to improve the atrocious conditions. As a young man, Yusupov had visited the slums of the imperial capital. There, he wrote,
"All around us the dregs of humanity lay half naked, drunk and filthy. They quarrelled, swore, vomited. The smell was beyond description.
There were those that called for change. First, the middle class, keen for a voice. They'd been given a parliament, the Duma, in 1906, but it had little real power. Second, more frightening to the old order, a new breed of professional revolutionaries had emerged, struggling to politicize the peasants and workers. But for Tsar Nicholas, change was out of the question. And so long as the army and state police obeyed him, protests would be met with savage efficiency. His opponents, if caught, faced death or hard labor. This, then, was the brutal reality Yusupov chose to ignore. It was not just respect that had propped up the old order, but force. And without the loyalty of his troops, the Tsar was nothing. Three years of war with Germany had tested that loyalty to the limits.
It began so well. A brilliant advance pushing into East Prussia. But we were fighting the best equipped army in the world. Our troops were underfed, badly equipped. Whole regiments were taken prisoner without even having had a chance to resist. And no amount of heroism, it seemed, could make up for the incompetence of those in command.
In the trenches, revolutionary ideas had caught on fast. The professional army had been all but wiped out in the war's first year. Those that had replaced them were mostly peasants, forced to enlist. They listened with interest when Bolshevik soldiers spoke not just of peace, but of the just society that could follow a revolution. Land and bread for all. In the cities, there were food shortages, rations, inflation. Police reports spoke of growing discontent. To those suffering, rumors of Rasputin's corruption underlined the gulf between ruler and ruled. But Rasputin was a symptom, not a cause. A distinction Yusupov, in December 1916, simply failed to understand.
We had laced cakes with poison, cyanide. Enough in each to kill a man, and more in the wine I'd poured him. He was talking of plots, of jealous aristocrats who couldn't bear to think of some peasant at home in the royal palace. All the time, stuffing these cakes into his mouth. He was like a demon, the way it had no effect. So at last, I pulled out my revolver. He was looking at a cross on the table. He said,
It's nice, nice. How much did it cost?
and I said, keep your eyes on the cross, Grigori, and say a prayer.
Yusupov had lanced the boil, but the diseased body of Tsarist Russia remained. The murder made no real difference. In February 1917, a spontaneous demonstration broke out, a strike against rationing led by women textile workers. From the front, Nicholas ordered force to break up the demonstration. But this time the soldiers refused to open fire. All at once, the fragile nature of autocracy lay exposed. The Tsar found himself with neither the support nor the means to impress his will. In a train carriage halfway back to Petrograd, he signed his abdication.
We have decided to renounce the throne of Russia, to unburden ourselves of the supreme power.
In the weeks and months that followed, Russia began to break down. The Duma, the parliament, set up a provisional government, promising to hold elections soon. But revolution could not be avoided. Workers' soviets or councils urged soldiers and workers to take power and property from factory owners and landlords. Across Russia, the rich found their estates pillaged. Eight months later, the Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace and took control from the provisional government. And those of the old order fled for their lives.
For my part, the Bolsheviks came for me. But when they heard I was the man that killed Rasputin, they slapped me on the back. They called me friend, played the balalaika, danced. Here in Paris, there are those that still won't talk to me. Rasputin's murder was the first shot of the revolution, they say. Better 1,000 Rasputins than the Bolsheviks. It's nonsense. I know it's nonsense. But the thought haunts me nonetheless.
What did I know of these people, these Bolsheviks? Just what I'd heard. That they were monsters, devils. Their very names, Lenin, Trotsky, Kamenev, scared the British upper classes out of their wits. And yet, when Kamenev invited me, I said yes, without hesitation.
On the 11th of September 1920, Claire Sheridan, a wealthy young widow turned fashionable sculptor, set steam from Newcastle in secret. Her destination was Bolshevik Russia. Three years earlier, in 1917, the Bolshevik October Revolution had sent shockwaves round the world. Lenin and his Bolsheviks had seized power in the name of the workers. The old order based on class and the ownership of property, they'd destroyed. In 1918, they'd had the Tsar and his family shot. In Britain, as elsewhere, the old order had watched in horror. Winston Churchill, the young Minister for War, described Lenin as a plague virus that would infect the world. Claire Sheridan was Winston Churchill's cousin. So what had possessed her, despite her family, despite her class, to visit the very heart of this Bolshevik revolution?
August 17th, 1920, London. As arranged, Kamenev arrived punctually at 10 o'clock for 1 hour, but ended up staying for 3. There's no great challenge in his face. It's a perfect oval. But it's difficult to make him serious because he smiles all the time.
Lev Kamenev, one of Lenin's closest colleagues, had come to London on a secret trade mission, but his visit was widely whispered in society. Claire had joked that to include Kamenev in her next exhibition would be a great stunt. A sitting was arranged.
He wasn't at all what I'd expected. He spoke for 3 hours without stopping. We talked in French. He was really very friendly, very charming. I teased him about Russia, about what I'd heard. I said, I read in the Moscow canteens recently they found human fingers in the soup. Is that true?
Where did you read that? In your London Times?
In return, he gave me this long, passionate description of the revolution, of their aims and ideals.
Did they also tell you in these canteens the working man can buy a square meal for 3.5 rubles?
When he talked politics, he got all worked up and gave the pinched, quizzical frown that I wanted.
It's what we fought for.
And then maybe because I'd been saying that all my life I'd loved Russian literature, Russian music, Russian dancing, Russian art, he stopped and he said,
You know, you should come to Russia to see for yourself. I'll get Lenin and Trotsky to sit for you. Does that tempt you?
I thought at first he was joking. But when I saw in his eyes he was serious, I replied, Just let me know when you're leaving. I'll be ready like a shot.
En route to Russia, Claire learnt more from Kamenev of this Bolshevik society that so appalled her friends. Rather than finding it frightening, she found it strangely inspiring. Kamenev showed her photographs of the revolution of 1917. How the peasants had shared out the land between them. How the workers had set up committees to run the factories for themselves. Women working now alongside men. As Kamenev described it, this was more than just the destruction of the old order. It was a struggle to create a more equal society, where people could work not for the profit of others, but for the common good. By the time Claire arrived in Moscow, this workers' paradise was already 3 years old. But first impressions, to say the least, were disappointing.
We were driven at full speed through streets shuttered as if after an air raid. The few people we passed looked, frankly, wretched, shuffling along, not one quick step, not one smiling face. Just the sadness of autumn and a dread of winter coming too soon.
Claire moved in with the Kamenyevs, sleeping on a sofa because no one had fixed her a place to stay. The clothes she'd brought were completely unsuitable. No one had mentioned how cold it would soon become. Meanwhile, the Kamenyevs argued over a Macintosh Lev had failed to bring back from England. And of course, Madame Kamenyev took an instant dislike to this well-dressed young foreigner.
You have such pretty things. Here we have nothing.
What followed were days of frustration. Kamenyev was too busy to arrange the sittings he'd promised. Without him, Claire found herself drifting around the Kremlin, the center of government, until the cold drove her back indoors.
September 22nd. I just wander around, opening doors. Today I stumbled into a barrack room full of Red Army soldiers playing cards. Over the Tsar's palace, crows peck at the flagstaff where the royal flag once flew. I feel, I must confess, very lost and very lonely.
Bolshevik Russia set up in Claire a flood of confusing emotions. On the one hand, there were frequent glimpses of that Bolshevik spirit she found so exciting. The fact that here no one was sir or madam, everyone equal. Tovarish, comrade. She saw soldiers learning to paint in the art schools, workers visiting museums for the first time in their lives. There were campaigns for literacy to teach people to read. Universities had opened their doors to the working class. On the other hand, there was so much that tested her traditional upbringing. The way the Bolsheviks condemned religion and old-fashioned values. There were campaigns against the family. There was divorce on demand, even legalized abortion, a law passed during her stay. But all this, the pros and cons of Bolshevik idealism, seemed secondary to a more obvious problem, the mood in the streets. People were hungry. Fuel was rationed. There was talk of disease. At a very basic level, it seemed the revolution was failing to deliver.
What did you expect, a Garden of Eden?
Certainly more than this. I went to the ballet last night. The whole theatre full of workers. It was wonderful. They loved it. They gobbled up the performance with their eyes. But their faces were pinched. The clothes all torn and dirty. And I'm sorry. I thought, what is the point in feeding their souls if you can't even feed their stomachs?
You must believe we would like to.
Like to?
I'm not denying the suffering, Claire, but it's not so easy. You seem to forget that Bolshevik Russia is at war.
The Bolsheviks had faced opposition from the start. Lenin had pulled Russia out of the First World War. Many Russians had found this shameful. Joining up with those that still supported the Tsar, they'd formed anti-Bolshevik armies, the Whites. And Russia had split in civil war. At first, the Reds, the Bolsheviks, controlled just a smallish area of central Russia. But under Trotsky, the Commissar for War, the Red Army had grown in size and beaten the Whites back.
We barely survived at all. The British and French armed the whites, blockaded our borders. All the food we have must go to the army. That's only reasonable. And as for fuel, well, there's no way to bring it to Moscow. Every man that can be spared to fight is fighting. What did you expect? That war and blockade wouldn't hurt?
The war seemed believable as an excuse for Moscow's problems, but it didn't satisfy everyone. One such was a man Claire met at a rally in Red Square. Trotsky was there, addressing some troops.
He asked me, "Do you know why the guards keep us so far from Trotsky?" Because any number of men and women in this crowd would love him dead. This show of love for Trotsky, it's all theater, he said. He was speaking French, but even so I was frightened for him. To talk like that in public. He said, when you've lived so close to death for so long, you stop caring. He took me by the arm, said he had things to tell me.
In her diary, Claire doesn't record exactly what this man, Victor, told her. Perhaps she was frightened the diary might fall into the wrong hands. All she says is that Victor gave her the other side of the story. Perhaps he explained how, for many, the Bolsheviks had betrayed the dream of revolution. In 1917, there'd been such hope. Prisoners released from jail, the death sentence abolished, the Tsar's secret police disbanded. Elections were held. For the first time in Russia, real democracy, the rule of the people, seemed possible. But when the votes for the new assembly were counted in January 1918, the Bolsheviks were shown up as the minority party they'd always been. Lenin closed the assembly down after only one day. As he put it, "We will completely and publicly destroy democracy in the name of the revolutionary dictatorship. It will be a good lesson."
Press censorship came back. The death penalty came back. We wondered what we'd fought for. All opposition banned. The state is an instrument of terror. That's what Lenin said. And within weeks of coming to power, they set up the Cheka.
The security police.
To give it its full name, the Extraordinary Commission for the Struggle Against Counter-Revolution and Sabotage. Run by a certain Felix Dzerzhinsky. Have you heard of Dzerzhinsky?
I've heard of Dzerzhinsky.
Under Dzerzhinsky, the Cheka had become Lenin's weapon against the enemies of the revolution. They killed at least 50,000 people in the Civil War years. They became known as the Red Terror. In fact, Claire had met Dzerzhinsky just a few days beforehand. Kamenev had at last arranged for her to sculpt the leading Bolsheviks. First had come Zinoviev, a leading light in the Comintern, the international communist movement. Dzerzhinsky had come next.
At the time, I didn't really know how important he was. He was quiet as a monk, his eyes so sad. I said, "You're an angel to sit so still." He said, "You learn patience in prison."
Before the revolution, he spent 11 years in Tsarist jails. It taught him how to hate.
Under Lenin, Bolshevik Russia had become a one-party state. Like the Tsars, he ruled by decree. In 1919, he declared that to win the war, the state had to take control of everything it needed. Those at all well off found their property seized on the orders of the Bolsheviks. Claire found herself the proud owner of a fur coat, about which she didn't ask too many questions. But those that suffered most were those that had least to give, the peasants in the countryside.
It was all an enormous confidence trick. Lenin knew he had no chance of power without the peasants, so he promised them land. And Marx taught him that all private ownership is theft, but he gives land to the peasants. Makes no sense! It was just a matter of time before the Bolsheviks took it back. Of course, the war disrupts the food supply. The cities grow hungry. So Trotsky, commissar for war, says, fine. We've beaten the whites. Now we'll use my Red Army to beat the peasants. What little grain they have, we'll take from them at the point of a bayonet.
The effects of Bolshevism, war, and bad harvests in the countryside were devastating. From late 1920, famine hit the Volga Basin. Perhaps 5 million people lost their lives. In this dark time, the country at breaking point, the revolution one step from collapse, Claire's main concern was less the pros or cons of Bolshevism, but whether, as promised, she'd ever meet Lenin or Trotsky. She always said, afterwards,
I went to Moscow because some portrait work was offered me. Politics was not my affair.
At last she got her wish. On October 19th, 1920, Claire Sheridan met Trotsky and sculpted his image. Trotsky was charming. She describes him flirting with her, kissing her clay-covered hands. They got on like a house on fire. Meanwhile, his troops put down peasant rebellions. More deaths, more suffering. But the high point of her visit came with the call to sculpt Lenin himself.
Kamenev said, "It's all arranged. Lenin will receive you from 11 until 4 tomorrow." He said, "Do the best work you've ever done. You'll be face to face with history." The strange thing is, on meeting him, how he looked so ordinary. Very unheroic in his spotted blue suit and his short legs. Actually, he looked very ill.
Unlike Trotsky, Lenin was more reserved. Claire and he talked about the war, about Churchill, about art, and how it disguises hard reality. But Lenin was preoccupied, working for hours at a stretch without food, without even a cup of tea. What Claire didn't know, what no one knew at that time, was that in these months Lenin was preparing to rein back the revolution. Right from the start, it was Lenin that had driven the Bolsheviks forward. Some Bolsheviks, Kamenev included, believed Lenin had wanted too much, too soon, that a workers' state was not possible in a country with so little industry, the workers so outnumbered by peasants on the land. Lenin's impatience had created a tyranny, the workers in the cities against the rest. And that tyranny had brought the country to the point of ruin. In 1921, Lenin declared a tactical retreat. Food requisitions were abolished. Some free trade allowed once more. For the die-hard Bolsheviks, this new economic policy, the return of private trade to Russia, was a bitter pill to swallow. With the country so obviously against them, they developed a kind of siege mentality, which later, in more ruthless hands, would lead to even greater horror. Claire, meanwhile, had returned to London, bringing back her trophies to the old world, as she called it, of tips and restaurants and civilization. The London Times ran her story for a week, but London society snubbed her as a traitor to her class.
Any room I entered, the whisper became a loud buzz. Bolshevik. Whole drawing rooms emptied. Friends turned their backs. I felt it wasn't up to me to justify these bloody Bolsheviks. I knew I'd not fully understood the condition of things in Russia. But faced with such ignorant nonsense, time and time again I found myself coming to their defense. Until it reached a point, commissions for new work entirely dried up, and I was forced to leave London for America. It seemed they simply could not forgive me.
The 23rd of November, 1932. Professor Dmitry Pletnev, head of the Kremlin hospital, signs the death warrant of a 30-year-old Russian woman, Nadezhda Alliluyeva. She'd begun life no one special, the daughter of a railwayman from Tiflis in Georgia. But by some historical accident, the man she'd married, Joseph Jugashvili, grew up to become the most powerful and the most feared ruler of 20th century Russia, Joseph Stalin. Stalin controlled the Soviet Union from the late 1920s to his death in 1953. He's remembered as the war leader who led the Red Army to victory over Nazi Germany. He's remembered as the man who transformed the Soviet Union into an industrial superpower. But just as much, today he's remembered as a tyrant, a dictator, who caused suffering in the Soviet Union on a scale rarely seen in history. 20 million people are thought to have died because of Stalin. Some historians have called him the greatest mass murderer of all time. This is the story of Stalin's terror, focusing on the life and death of his wife. We know the story only indirectly. Most of those too close to the truth, Stalin later had killed. Pletnev, the family doctor, was one of those unfortunates. But before his arrest in 1938, he told what he knew to a nurse in the Kremlin. This reconstruction is based on that account.
I met her first in 1927. She was a very straightforward woman, Nadezhda. Always dressed in plain clothes, no jewelry. I remember she used to wear this simple steel watch on a black band. They had a little flat in the Kremlin, just 3 rooms in the old servants' quarters. When I first met her, I found it hard to imagine that her husband was so powerful. But Nadezhda, you see, she was a good communist. She had ideals. Her father was a worker, a revolutionary. So for her, it was simply the right way to live.
Not too hot, is it?
No, it's fine. I was Stalin's personal doctor. He had heart problems. For an hour each day, I massaged his head and body, tested his food for poison. He grew to trust me, but he was difficult. He had mood swings. I sometimes worried for Nadezhda, and she would just laugh and say,
"Don't worry, I have him well under control. He has so much on his mind. When he comes home, I bring the children, Svetlana and Vasily, in to see him. With them, he's like a lamb."
It was touching. She talked of him with such pride. Once, she described a rally in Red Square, the lines of colourful marchers. She called them slaves who had been freed from their chains and now were masters of their own nation. And Stalin, the father of her children, standing there on Lenin's tomb, his face and Lenin's intertwined on the flags, facing the future together. And she'd say to me, it made her quite literally numb with joy.
No film survives of Nadezhda, just a few photographs, some from the early days, before the revolution. Stalin was a member of the Georgian Menshevik Party. He robbed trains, held up banks. She was 23 years younger, but she called herself his comrade in arms. With the revolution, they moved to Moscow. He found favor with Lenin. He became party secretary. She, meanwhile, worked in Lenin's office. She was involved. But as the years slipped by, Lenin long dead, Stalin in power, she'd found herself increasingly cooped up in the Kremlin, her life passing her by.
And so, this was in 1931, she decided to enroll as a student at the Institute of Commerce. Stalin didn't want her to go, but he could see that she was unhappy, so he agreed. After her first visit to the Institute, she came to me, and I could see that she'd been crying. They were rude to you?
Oh, it wasn't that. It's just that none of them would speak to me. The other students. Like they were terrified. Because I am his wife. Am I being silly?
Your husband is a very powerful man.
Oh, I know that. But power needn't be frightening. Unless there's something wrong. But there was something my mother said. Before I was born, my father was arrested by the Tsarist police, the Okhrana. They sent him into exile. Throughout my childhood, we knew what it felt like to fear power. Then last year, my mother said to Joseph, well, shouted at him, that Russia felt now just as it had done under the Tsars. Joseph was furious. He still won't speak to her. And I've tried to patch things up, but And to be honest, I had no idea what she was talking about. Until I saw the faces of those students. The fear. And now that I'm so obviously talking out of turn, I can see the fear in your eyes too.
I think that experience at the Institute, it changed her. It made her less trusting. In the Kremlin, she talked to people, asked questions. And she made friends with Krupskaya, Lenin's widow. Krupskaya had no love for Stalin. She said he was no real Bolshevik. And that all that time, he just wanted power for its own sake. And she hated him because, she said, he'd used Lenin's memory, twisted his memory to win power.
He loved Lenin. We all did. When I worked for Lenin, every night Joseph would ask me, what did he say? What did he do? Who was he with?
You were a spy in Lenin's camp, that's all. By the end, Lenin could see for himself your Joseph was no good. There was a will. Did you know that? It's not talked of now. In his will, Lenin wrote, Comrade Stalin is too rude, too dangerous. Remove him. But the others, Trotsky, Kamenov, Zinoviev, they thought your Joseph was a mere nothing. Pen pusher, party secretary, comrade filing card. That's what they called him, the grey blur. So they ignored the will. More fool them.
Lenin had died in 1924. He'd left behind a people in mourning and a struggle for power at the top. With the contents of Lenin's will kept quiet, straight away Stalin had seen how to turn Lenin's death to advantage. Krupskaya wanted a simple burial, no fuss. Instead, Stalin turned Lenin into a cult. He had his body embalmed, a tomb built in Red Square, his words printed in bulk like some religious text. And all the time, Stalin played the part of Lenin's humble disciple.
Every night he would spend hours learning Lenin's words. Whole paragraphs by heart. I thought...
You thought it was devotion. It was ammunition. Lenin had said there must be no divisions in the party. So every time Kamenev made a speech, Trotsky, Zinoviev, beautiful speeches, filled with passion, Stalin found a way of using Lenin against them. Quoting some little phrase, twisting its meaning. And so the party would vote. The party, which as secretary he packed with his supporters. And these old Bolsheviks would find themselves accused of splitting from the party line. Till at last Stalin and the party line became one.
Historians still don't agree what it was that drove Stalin on in his climb to the top. Whether he truly cared for the revolution, or if he just wanted power. Pletnev agreed with Krupskaya. As Stalin's doctor, his diagnosis, which he kept to himself, was that Stalin was a paranoid megalomaniac, actually mad in his need to have power, and suspicious, fearful of all those around him. He describes how Stalin kept a gun in his pocket at all times. But it's not true to say he was no revolutionary. Lenin had put the revolution on hold. In power, Stalin kick-started it once more. The tragedy was, being so ruthless, he pushed the revolution further than Lenin had ever dared.
All that time, Nadezhda was still going to the Institute. The other students had begun to trust her. She made friends. In particular, one girl called Nina Karova. And one day, she found Nina reading a letter from her mother in floods of tears. She put her arm around her, but Nina pushed her away. She said, "I don't need your sympathy. It won't help my mother, dying from hunger." Nadezhda was horrified. She said, "We'll send money." But the other students took her aside and explained that money was of no use, that there was famine, and that millions were dying.
In the countryside, Nadezhda heard Stalin had created scenes of unimaginable horror. A war on the peasantry. It began with collectivization, forcing the peasants into huge state-run farms intended to increase production. But most peasants wanted to hold on to their land. The land Lenin had encouraged them to take. They butchered their sheep and cows rather than hand them over. Meanwhile, the kulaks, the better-off peasants, so-called class enemies, Stalin had rounded up and sent to labor camps in the north and east. Anyone who objected to collectivization was branded a kulak. Some were simply shot out of hand. In this chaos, the food supply to workers in the cities dried up. Stalin sent in requisition squads to seize food, as Lenin had done in the worst days of war communism. But this time they took everything, even the grain to sow the next year's harvest.
In the Ukraine, in the Crimea, in the Caucasus, there's nothing left. Nina's mother says they've already killed the cats and dogs. They make soup out of dandelions and nettles. Every village has a cart to carry away the dead. And anyone who isn't swollen with hunger, the requisition squads have orders to torture until they say where their food is hidden. But there is no food.
Nadezhda challenged Stalin, asked him, did he know? As if he wouldn't know. All that time they were exporting grain abroad to buy machines for industry. The famine was quite deliberate. He pushed her aside. He said she was never to leave the Kremlin again. But she went back to the institute. And then she found that Nina Karova and 8 of her friends had been arrested by the secret police.
Even to talk of the famine was an offense. If found guilty, you got 3 to 5 years in a labor camp, a gulag. At last, Nadezhda understood the fear she'd seen in her classmates' eyes that first time in the institute. Russia, of course, had always been a police state. The Tsars had their Okhrana, Lenin his Cheka. But under Stalin, the gulag population rose from 30,000 to 2 million in just 3 years. In timber camps in the north, in freezing work complexes in remote parts of eastern Siberia, prisoners suffered intolerable conditions. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, died. In desperation, Nadezhda tried to get her friends released.
Nina.
She called the head of the security police.
Yes.
ordered him to let them go.
Immediately.
He said he was sorry. They were already dead.
What do you mean?
Of disease.
How can that be?
In prison, you understand? Infection and so on. Hello? Hello?
It's not exactly known what happened in the days that followed. Pletnev saw Nadezhda just once more, at Stalin's request. She was hysterical, shouting that Stalin was mad, that he'd betrayed the revolution. Later that month, she was seen in a Red Square rally, marching with some students, her hair all over the place. And then on the night of November 22nd, 1932, a gunshot was heard from her room. No one knows exactly how Nadezhda died. Nowadays, most historians think it was suicide, that she killed herself for shame at Stalin's crimes. Radio broadcasts spoke of natural causes. Meanwhile, the rumors began that Stalin had killed her himself in a fight or in cold blood. At the funeral, it said Stalin turned from her coffin with the words, "She died my enemy." Pletnev continued as Stalin's personal doctor for another 6 years. As before, he'd massage Stalin's body, test his food for poisons. Members of the Politburo would come in, secretaries. They'd talk, none of them much minding what they said in front of this doctor. All the while, Pletnev kept notes. In a file which he called On the Bloody Joseph Stalin I, he recorded details of the next wave of Stalin's terror, the purges.
It was terrifying. A wave of arrests right across the Soviet Union. Tens of thousands of men and women interrogated, tortured, sent for hard labor, or shot.
The purges began in 1934. In revenge, Stalin said, for the murder of Sergei Kirov, the Leningrad party boss. In fact, it's now known Stalin himself had Kirov murdered, killing one rival, then using that death to justify killing more. In the months and years that followed, many old scores were settled. The old Bolsheviks, Zinoviev and Kamenev, put on trial and shot. All those that knew of Lenin's will, all those who opposed collectivization, all those that supported Kirov, disposed of. At the peak of the purge, Stalin is known to have signed the death warrants of up to 3,000 people in one day. In February 1938, Pletnev was given warning his term was coming. The state newspaper Pravda, Truth, published an article planted by Stalin, damning Pletnev as a sadist doctor. The article said he liked to bite his patients. It was a way of destroying his reputation before the arrest, which was bound to follow.
I went to see Stalin. After Nadezhda's death, he'd given me a car. American. Wonderful car. I think to keep me quiet. Anyway, I drove it to Stalin's dacha. I wanted to see his face. The guards let me through, and I put the newspaper on his desk. The article staring him in the face. He said he knew nothing about it. He said he'd have the editor shot. He was embarrassed. Never seen him embarrassed before. And I left him. That was yesterday.
In the last great show trial of the purges, the Bukharin trial of 1938, Pletnev received 15 years hard labor. At that point, he disappears from history. The nurse to whom he told his story believes he was taken from the court to the Lubyanka prison, and there shot, like so many others, in the back of the head. In February 1931, Joseph Stalin made a speech to the Central Committee of the Soviet Union. In it, he warned,
Russia must overtake the advanced capitalist countries in just 10 years. Or, I swear to you, those capitalist countries will destroy us.
10 years later, in 1941, Nazi Germany invaded Russia. In a lightning strike, the German army swept east with a speed that made Soviet collapse seem certain. But then, with German tanks just 10 miles from Moscow, the Red Army began slowly to push back. Soviet propaganda hailed this advance as painful but heroic. But also they stressed how this advance would not have been possible were it not for another advance. Just as painful, just as heroic. The creation over 10 years of Soviet industrial strength. In just 10 years, a backward peasant society had been transformed under Stalin's orders, modernized, industrialized, to face the capitalist threat. As an American observer recalled, what had been won seemed nothing less than a battle of iron and steel.
For 10 years, the Soviet Union's been at war. The Soviet people sweating, shedding blood and tears. People were wounded and killed. Women and children froze to death. Thousands were court-martialed and shot. I'd wager the battle of iron and steel alone caused more casualties than any battle in this present war so far.
This is one man's story of the industrialization of the Soviet Union, a story both tragic and triumphant. This rather dull photograph taken in 1925 shows an expanse of barren land 70 miles east of the Ural Mountains. It's a tough, unforgiving landscape. Winters here can last 9 months. For hundreds of years, the only people who worked this land were roving shepherds, the Bashkirs and Kirgizi. But under their feet were iron deposits so rich they swung compass needles off-center. They gave the place its name, Magnitogorsk. The same year that photograph was taken, industrial output in the Soviet Union was at rock bottom. Less than a sixth of what it had been, even under the Tsar. But that was to change. For the Bolsheviks, a workers' party, industry was the way forward. Industry managed by the workers' state, built by the workers, for the workers. For Stalin, industrialization was part of the international class struggle.
Let us advance full steam ahead to become a country of metal. And when we've put the USSR on a motor car and the peasant on a tractor, then let these much-admired capitalists try to overtake us. We'll see then which countries may be called backwards and which advanced.
1928, Stalin announced the first 5-year plan. Production targets way in advance of anything produced at that time were announced for every industry, with a concentration on iron, steel, coal, and oil. At Magnitogorsk, work began on an iron and steel complex to rival any in the capitalist world. Barren land would give way to vast blast furnaces and smelting plants. It was to be a symbol of what socialist planning could achieve. John Scott, an American, lived and worked in Magnitogorsk from 1932 to 1937.
I went to Russia because it seemed to me here was a society at least one step ahead of my own. When I left college, America was in depression. There were no jobs to be had, few opportunities for young energy and enthusiasm. Whereas from what I'd heard, Soviet Russia was something new, a society under construction. No unemployment, rather they were crying out for workers. So I went, turned up in Moscow. Told them I'd trained as a welder. They put me on a 4-day train trip east to this new miracle city. I remember feeling very happy.
What Scott found in Magnitogorsk was a world very different to the one he'd imagined. The city was no more than a disorganized building site, without roads or sewage pipes. Housing was just makeshift barracks. Food was scarce, and without enough wood or coal to go round, the cold was terrible. Scott's book describes the daily routine. The 2-mile walk to the blast furnace at minus 35 degrees. Equipment frozen. Wooden scaffolding covered in an inch of ice. It was hard, dangerous work.
There were accidents. Every day, men crushed by girders, scaffolding collapsing. The workers came from all over. Russians, Ukrainians, Jews, Tartars, Mongols. Mostly just peasants, their whole lives stuck on some beetroot patch, and now, here they were punching rivets into sheets of freezing metal. Not surprisingly, they underestimated the danger.
Kaya! What is it? There's a body up on top. Been out all night. Who is it? I don't know, he looks like a rigger. Must have slipped. I'll need 3 men to bring him down. They're just plow boys. They don't think. Stupid peasants. We'll pick it up then.
Sometimes you'd get angry. You'd spit out, why couldn't we have more light or more lumber to make the scaffolding safe? They'd look at you like you were some soft Westerner. Anyway, what could anyone do? There was no light because someone had jacked up the voltage so high the bulbs kept blowing. Lumber, they just chopped up for firewood. You could be shot, of course, for stealing government property, but it kept our hands warm.
When Scott first arrived in the Soviet Union, he thought it wonderful how people seemed not to mind about material comforts. How they ate only black bread, wore clothes till they fell to pieces, used old newspapers for writing letters or rolling up. It didn't take him long to realize the obvious. They ate black bread because that was all there was. In the one surviving photograph of Scott and his work gang, Scott is the only man smiling. And yet, if Scott's to be believed, the picture of hardship in these faces tells only half the story. Because behind that hardship, Scott found a purpose in Magnitogorsk that left him amazed.
I couldn't say how many suffered that hardship willingly. Some had come because they had no choice. They needed work, but others came I mean this with a burning enthusiasm, wanting to take part. My roommate was a young Russian called Kolya. We had the best room in the barrack because he was the foreman on my shift. His enthusiasm, right from the first day I arrived, it was infectious.
I mean, where you come from, they build big. Yes?
Yes.
American iron and steel, biggest in the world, yes?
Yeah.
Yes, well, here we'll build bigger. Except the difference is, in America, who takes the profit?
The bosses.
Capitalist parasites, What I build for myself. Every rivet in this plant, we all have a share. If some damn fool rigger freezes to death for some capitalist's profit, that makes me angry. If some damn fool rigger freezes to death for me and for you, for every Soviet man and woman and child, then that, my American friend, makes me very proud.
On the shift, you'd see people staring up at what we'd built. There was one man, his name was Kaibulin. He was a shepherd from Kazakhstan. 1 year earlier, he'd never seen a staircase. He'd never seen a train. He'd never seen a light bulb. And now here he was building the biggest blast furnace in the world. And it was his. As much as anyone's, it was his. The atmosphere was extraordinary. There was a room in every barrack called the Red Corner. Newspapers on the wall, banners, pictures of Lenin and Stalin. A library. Ours had over 200 books. 6 o'clock every night, the whole barrack, men and women, met there with guitars and balalaikas, and they'd sing workers' revolutionary songs, folk tunes, love songs. And then we'd talk. First maybe grumbles, why is the bread ration cut? Why is there so little sugar? But then someone would explain the party line, how one day the Soviet Union wouldn't have to export its sugar anymore, how one day there'll be enough for all. And people would listen and accept, because for all the hardship, there was a wonderful optimism that tomorrow would be better. And that somehow made it all worthwhile.
You know the difference between you and me. You are a reject from a system that's finished. Whereas I have this potato. Now it may not be much, but if we complete the plan on time, then our blast furnace will make metal. And with this metal, we will make tractors. And we will plow up so much of this land that I will end up with 2 potatoes. And maybe a motor car to sit in as I eat my potatoes. You see how it goes. Drink.
And so, at least for some, the hard work of Magnitogorsk was balanced with a real sense of purpose. Still, it was chaotic. The 5-year plan set ludicrous, unrealistic targets. But under that pressure, despite the temptation to fudge the figures, real advances were made. In 1935, the blast furnaces were ready. Magnitogorsk moved from construction to production. By 1936, every day the furnaces and mills produced 15,000 tons of iron ore, 4,000 tons of pig iron, 2,500 tons of rolled steel. Meanwhile, the dirty building site of the early 30s became a healthy and reasonably comfortable city. There were still barrack blocks, but plastered now and whitewashed. There were cinemas and theaters, a streetcar, and stores with goods in reasonable quantities at reasonable prices. As Scott put it, it was no longer necessary to steal in order to live.
I got married about that time. A Russian woman, Masha. She was born a peasant. She could remember the famine of the Civil War years. Now she felt the world was at her feet.
You can't do that. You've already moved.
I can. I hadn't put mine down.
She'd trained as a teacher. She'd learned the piano, how to play chess. I remember reading a speech of Stalin's one time, how he said, "Life has become better and more joyful." For us, yes, I believe it was true.
Sometimes Scott's picture of Magnitogorsk sounds like so much propaganda, like the hyped reports in the newsreels made to exaggerate Soviet success. But Scott mentions too the failures. Machinery pushed beyond safe limits, repairs left undone, work quotas that put a dreadful strain on the workforce, causing resentment and fear amongst those unable to keep up. For some, Magnitogorsk was a true labor of love, hard work justified by results. For others, it was just hard work, coupled with a very real fear of the system. From the mid-1930s onwards, that fear grew stronger. In Moscow, Stalin was holding show trials to kill off his old rivals. The prosecutor in the trials, Vyshinsky, urged the court to shoot like dogs the spies and traitors who betray our motherland. Propaganda encouraged people to denounce anyone slowing down the great Soviet advance. Those that set record targets were rewarded, but those that made mistakes stood accused as saboteurs, wreckers, enemies of the people.
What do you mean, clumsy? Clumsy's when you fall and break your stupid nose! When you break Soviet property, it's not clumsy! Guard! Guard!
Were the people prepared to wreck the works? Some, certainly. Some had good cause. In Magnitogorsk, as elsewhere, there were prisoners, slave laborers forced to work against their will. Most were kulaks, peasants condemned for no greater crime than owning a plot of land or a cow or two. There were 35,000 kulaks in Magnitogorsk. One, a man called Shabkov, worked in Scott's own team.
Kulak smoke. They brought us in closed boxcars. 12 days, sucking air through a chink in the wood. Standing in our own excrement like cattle. When we arrived, the army had fixed bayonets. They gave us tents to live in. That first winter, I don't know how many thousand died. All the children, I think. I lost my little girl. And then my son. And then my wife.
How long is your sentence?
5 years.
And then?
Where can I go? They won't let me do any other kind of work. I'll stay. Join the glorious march of Soviet labor.
Scott describes 2 cases of kulaks guilty of wrecking. One used a wrench to jam the works. Another filled the bearings of a gas turbine with ground glass. But the propaganda against wrecking was out of all proportion with the problem. Real sabotage was rare. Instead, for simple errors, or for no fault at all, managers and workers alike found themselves accused.
It just slipped out of control. At least at first, there seemed to be reasons why people were arrested. Production targets not met, machinery broken. People thought, no smoke without fire, but in 36, 37, it got out of hand. It became stupid. For no reason. Arrests at midnight, workers, managers taken off, held for months, then a secret trial perhaps, then exile or execution. No one was guilty, and so everyone was afraid. People would say, if only Stalin knew.
Eventually, John Scott himself was forced to leave Magnitogorsk. It was Kolya that broke the news.
It's nothing against you, you understand. But we can't have foreigners here anymore.
He'd survived black bread, rotten saltfish, the cold and hard work. But he'd not survived the purge. He left with Masha in 1939, disillusioned, but still amazed at the scale of what they'd achieved. His years in Magnitogorsk he described as the most productive of his life. Two years later, the German invasion plunged the Soviet Union into war, and the war seemed to justify what had gone before. The scramble to industrialize so fast paid back with iron and steel for guns and tanks. And all that talk of enemies of the state made real by this attack on the motherland. Stalin was now cast in a new light as war leader, father of his country, America's friend. For Scott, writing of Stalin in 1942, it seemed as if, to some extent, the ends had justified the means.
He knew how expensive, how brutal it would be. But he saw the threat. He knew one day enemy capitalist powers would try to destroy the first socialist state. So, ruthless, determined, he dragged the Soviet Union into the modern age. Along the way, millions of men and women died. Shot, frozen, starved, brutalized by labor. But the rest learned to work, to obey orders, to mind their own business, to take it on the chin without complaining. Things they'll need to survive a modern war. And if they do survive, and I believe they will, our debt to them will be enormous.
In September 1949, an American spy plane on the borders of the Soviet Union picked up samples of radiation at high altitude. As President Truman explained to the American people, it could mean just one thing.
We have evidence that within recent weeks, an atomic explosion occurred within the Soviet Union.
The world had woken up to the threat of nuclear weapons 4 years beforehand, in 1945. To end the Second World War, the Americans had dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima in Japan. It became clear then, whoever controlled such weapons could alter the balance of world power. For 4 years, America alone had the technology. But now, with the news of these secret Soviet tests, it seemed the communist world had caught up. This program tells the story of how Stalin got his bomb.
Agent Lamphere, Klaus Fuchs.
I've told them everything I can remember. I want to make it clear. I have nothing more to give you.
That's just a few more questions, Klaus. Agent Lamphere's come all the way from Washington.
8 months after the Soviet test, in May 1950, an American agent of the FBI was given permission to question a British citizen serving time in Wormwood Scrubs. The prisoner's name was Klaus Emil Fuchs.
I just thought you could tell me what you told Mr. Scarden here, starting from the beginning. And take your time, Klaus. We're not going anywhere.
German by birth, Klaus Fuchs had worked as a nuclear scientist in both Britain and America. But secretly, throughout that time, he'd been passing information to the Soviet Union. In 1945, he'd passed over the greatest secret of all: how to make the atom bomb. His story is that of a man caught between East and West, in a decade that saw relations between America and the Soviet Union collapse, from wartime alliance to the post-war hostility of the Cold War. For his treason, Fuchs was sentenced to 14 years.
So what do you want to know?
What made you a communist? Seems a good place to start.
It's all in the file.
I was German. See it from my point of view. Hitler's Nazis had come to power. All of a sudden I had no country. My country flew a swastika flag. To be a communist was to show your hatred for the Nazis. That's how it began. I was beaten up by brown shirts. I was left in a river for dead. I escaped. I came to Britain.
But you stayed a communist.
I don't see these distinctions between nations. I see distinctions between people. Ruling class, working class.
An international brotherhood of workers.
And many of the scientists I worked with thought the same. In Britain, in 1941 this was, I read communist literature. Marx and Lenin. It was exciting.
Exciting?
Because it was so scientific. For the first time, a theory explaining how people behave, the building blocks of how society works. If you understand the building blocks, you can control history, build a better future. Meanwhile, we were studying the atom, the smallest building bricks of matter, learning to control nature. We thought there was nothing we could not achieve.
Fuchs's research into the process of splitting atoms of uranium was at the cutting edge of science. This theory of fission was only 2 years old, but already it had generated great excitement across the world. In Russia, scientists like Igor Kurchatov knew as well as anyone what this work meant. Splitting atoms would set off a chain reaction in which vast amounts of energy would be released. It could be used to make a super bomb like no weapon ever seen before. But in June 1941, 1 month after Fuchs began work for the British, the German army invaded Soviet Russia. this desperate time, Soviet atomic research was shelved in favor of more urgent short-term needs.
From my point of view, of course. When the Germans invaded Russia, it simplified things.
How do you mean, simplified things?
Well, it's hard to explain. I had no doubt that I disliked much in the West. Britain was riddled with class snobbery. There was injustice. There was depression.
Didn't stop you taking British citizenship?
No. But just as much I was suspicious of Stalin. I felt, as a communist, I should admire Russia more, but there was much I disapproved of. So, when Hitler turned on Stalin, it made it easier. Now I felt truly Russia was my real fatherland. The sacrifice forced on Russia to fight this terrible war, it was the least I could do.
So you passed them information?
Just a little to start with, and then a little more.
In late 1941, Fuchs handed copies of his work on fission to a Soviet official in London. But his actions are hard to judge. After all, with Russia fighting Germany, the Soviet Union was now Britain's ally.
The Red Army fights on with a gallantry that not only excites the admiration of its allies, but must be causing grave doubts about final victory in the minds of the German people.
British propaganda praised the Russians, but the Russians looked for more than admiration. They needed their allies to attack Germany from the west, to take the pressure off this slaughter in the east. At a terrible cost, that attack was delayed 3 years. Fuchs believed the delay was deliberate.
It was disgraceful. A fight to the death, that's what it was. And Britain and America just sat by and watched.
It wasn't like that. D-Day took years to organize. We couldn't afford to botch it.
You know what Truman said? He said, if we see Germany's winning the war, we should help Russia. If we see Russia's winning the war, we should help Germany. Let them dispose of each other. That was in 41.
He wasn't president in 41. He wasn't speaking for America.
No. But he was saying what you were all thinking, wasn't he?
To some extent, Fuchs was right. The differences between capitalist West and communist East were deep-rooted, only papered over by this wartime alliance. In fact, it was the war itself that showed many in the West how powerful Soviet Russia had become.
Russian bayonets and Russian tanks.
There was a growing awareness that today's friend might be tomorrow's enemy. In 1943, without telling their Soviet allies, the British and Americans combined their atomic programs, and Fuchs moved with the British team to America. They lived and worked in a US Army camp at Los Alamos in New Mexico. The Manhattan Project boasted the greatest concentration of scientific talent the world had ever known. Their vital task: to produce an atomic bomb before the Germans got there first. Despite his natural awkwardness, Fuchs made friends in Los Alamos. But all the time he was living a double life.
It was as if I'd split my mind into two separate compartments. In one compartment, I let myself make friends and be free and easy and happy. In the other compartment, I kept my duty to Soviet Russia and my meetings with my contact in Santa Fe.
Codename Raymond.
So, yes, in my mind, my fellow scientists were both friends, but also people I could betray.
In 1945, the Manhattan Project was ready. Just before dawn on July 17th, in the desert 90 miles from Los Alamos, the countdown to the world's first atomic explosion began.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We had prepared for it for so long, but still it left us astounded. This extraordinary force we'd unleashed, as if we'd conjured up the sun itself. We stood there in our dark glasses. There were shouts of celebration, but also such awe.
In 1945, by comparison, Soviet nuclear research was still in its early stages. On a secret forest site 200 miles from Moscow, a research base, Arzamas-16, had been set up. But in the spring of '45, the pace at Arzamas had slowed almost to nothing. These home movies show Kurchatov, the scientist in charge of the project. He'd grown his beard in the war's early stages and had once vowed never to shave till the war was won. Now that victory over Germany had at last arrived. The Red Army was in Berlin, bringing to a close 4 years of struggle. As Kurchatov's biographer later described, it seemed for the scientists the pressure was now off.
We've been building a cyclotron, a uranium graphite atomic pile, and other structures. You saw them being built from the lab windows. And now, almost at once, you felt the tension lifting. Because with the fascists wiped out, it was clear to everyone this new weapon would no longer be needed for victory. Instead, we thought we could turn our efforts to finding peaceful uses for nuclear energy, developing breakthroughs in medicine, cheap energy for power to lighten human labor, research for the good, not destruction of mankind.
For almost all Soviet citizens, it was a time of strange mixed emotions. The war had hit the Soviet Union unbelievably hard. 27 million people are thought to have died. 25 million left homeless. Industry was ruined. Famine was near. But at least the war was over. Despite everything, this was a time of triumph. And in this triumph, Soviets and Americans were shoulder to shoulder, as never before, joint conquerors. At the victory parades in Red Square, American generals stood at Stalin's side. It seemed to ordinary Soviets that out of suffering might at last come a time of peace in which to rebuild. But it was a naive hope. And it was the bomb that woke people up to this naivety. So far, no ordinary citizen, American or Soviet, knew of the existence of nuclear weapons. But in August '45, just 3 weeks after the Los Alamos test, atomic bombs were exploded for the first time in anger, for real. The bomb drops at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ordered by Truman to end the war against Japan, gave the world a graphic glimpse of America's newfound strength. The power to destroy, at a distance, whole cities, entire civilian populations. To the Russians, Hiroshima seemed a direct warning. against which their cities had no defense.
It was atomic blackmail, pure and simple. We knew now there'd be no time to recover. The German war was over, but now we faced a new war, not of blood, but of nerves, against our former ally, America. And we, the scientists, were in the front line. Kurchatov was called to Moscow. There was a meeting. Stalin told him, "One demand of you, comrade. Give us the bomb in the shortest possible time. We are in great danger."
Despite the desperate state of the Soviet economy, the industry necessary for atomic research was rushed into existence. Not just scientists in labs, but processing plants, reactors, vast mining operations for uranium and graphite. The thousands of laborers involved were prisoners, slaves supplied by the secret police. But as the scientists put it later, this was no time to be particular.
There was, it's hard to describe, a special atmosphere. We thought only that we must complete our task as soon as possible before the American atom bomb fell on us. But also there was an urgency which was more personal. To put it bluntly, we knew that if we failed, we would join the prisoners, and that other scientists would be found to fill our shoes.
But in this scramble for a solution to the atomic problem, Kurchatov did have one enormous advantage: a complete description of the American bomb, drawings and all, courtesy of Klaus Emil Fuchs.
Was this the man? Was this your contact?
Raymond. Yes. He looked more fleshy than I remember.
But you'll testify that this man, Harry Gold, was your contact in the States.
All that time, I never knew his name. We met in Santa Fe in the summer of '45. I'd taken leave from Los Alamos and driven through New Mexico. It's the most beautiful landscape in the world. Beside me, an envelope containing descriptions, calculations, even a scale drawing.
Of the bomb?
Of the test bomb, yes. I drove to where we'd arranged, parked under the tree. The sun was so hot. And then I saw him approaching. Codename Raymond. We talked briefly. He took the package, walked off toward the bus station. I never saw him again.
When he was caught later, Fuchs never showed any regret for what he'd done. Only a sense of double responsibility, that having helped make such a terrible weapon for one country, he then handed it on to another. The FBI estimated his treason pushed Soviet research forwards by at least 5 years.
The first breakthrough was on December the 25th, 1946, when our first atomic reactor went into operation. On the loudspeaker, the first clicks were heard from the counter, speeding to a steady hum as Kurchatov raised the lever. On that day, we produced just a few micrograms of plutonium, but it meant that the atom bomb was no longer a secret to us. And then, of course, the second milestone. August 29th, 1949. The greatest day of Kurchatov's career. There had been prepared a test site on the sun-scorched steppe of Kazakhstan. a large depression surrounded by hills, in the center of which a steel tower had been built. I remember seeing the guinea pigs, the horses and cows, and flocks of birds flying from the waterless desert to the man-made water pool in the center of the bowl. Soon they would be turned into steam, ionized together with the pool and scattered around the steppe. We felt nature gripped by a weight of silence. And then,
for his part in removing the threat of American atomic blackmail, Igor Kurchatov was showered with honors. The Stalin Prize, the Order of Lenin, a hero of Soviet labor. Meanwhile, the Americans began their search to discover how the Soviets had got their bomb so soon. By coincidence, within days, unscrambled coded messages led to Klaus Fuchs as the source of the leak. Within just 4 years, the arms race moved on once again. This time the Soviets overtaking the American lead. The hydrogen bomb, first exploded at the Kazakhstan test site in August '53, made the atom bomb seem trifling. Kurchatov, the bomb's designer, is said to have muttered, "It's monstrous, it's terrible, it must never be allowed to be used." Such weapons cast a shadow on superpower relations for the next 40 years.
It's never too late to make a date with learning, even after midnight, when a coach is turning back into a pumpkin and a prince is burning for that lone glass slipper. Be you sound or light sleeper, enter the learning zone that holds the key to doors unknown. Time to cross the threshold. Be you young or be you old, you are the first step of the learning journey. You are your own seed of the learning tree. Sit back, dream on, sleep tight, and leave the rest to midnight.
If you'd like a free copy of the BBC Learning Zone programme guide, send an A4 stamped addressed envelope with stamps to the value of 32p to BBC Education Information, Learning Zone Winter, Room 3318, White City, London, W12 7TS. You can also get more information about BBC Learning Zone on CFAX pages 630 to 636, or visit the BBC Learning Zone website at www.bbc.co.uk/learningzone. Always something to talk about. BBC Learning Zone. And in half an hour, we're talking Spanish with the Beginner's Language series. But first, an insider's view of Spain and its people. Join Robert Elms and Inca Marti on their trip through Ronda, La Mancha, Cordoba and Toledo, the more undiscovered parts of Spain inside out.
Today we look at the many ways in which Spain is currently rediscovering, reinventing and restoring its numerous glorious pasts.
I am on my way to Ronda on the Al-Andalus Express, and it's very early. Go away!
Castile. It was the capital of Spain before Madrid was a gleam in a monarch's eye. One of the most important Moorish towns, the most important Jewish town, and the highest and holiest cathedral in all Catholic Spain. And today, well, Toledo polishes up its past and flogs it relentlessly to passing tourists. And they're still polishing up the act.
Burnishing, bashing, the ancient skills of the craftsmen of Toledo still survive amid the tourist tat.
José, ¿qué hace aquí?
Pues esto aquí lo que se hace es el damasquinado.
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 Vale.
Se llama así por su origen de Damasco, de los árabes de Siria. Y consiste en incrustaciones de oro, oro de 24 quilates y oro de 22 quilates.
¿Qué es el proceso exactamente?
Los procesos, pues, la base donde se trabaja, lo negro, es acero. Lo que está haciendo aquí mi compañero es incrustar hilos de oro. La mano izquierda es la que incrusta y la mano derecha es la que va dibujando.
¿Es posible mirar la diferencia hecho a mano y hecho a máquina?
Sí, ahí te explico yo cómo es la diferencia. Aquí tenemos 3 piezas damasquinadas.
Claro.
Una está hecha a estampación a troquel. Eso es un troquel en una prensa y lo estampa. En estas piezas todo es perfecto. También está la electrolisis, que la electrolisis es una depositación de oro líquido. Claro. Es un baño de oro, pero que esto con el poco tiempo pues se va. Esto es el auténtico. Vemos todos los pétalos de las flores, vemos el plumaje de los pájaros. Y también una de las diferencias es que si damos por detrás la vuelta a la pieza, se deben de ver todos los golpes del martillo.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Traitor you were to the party and the country. And your family will be safe and honored. That I promise. You promise. It's all you have left, Sergo. Wait. You were in a seminary. You will recognize the words. Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. It is the book of Job. By the blast of God they perish, and by the breath of his nostrils are they consumed.
The Budweiser lizards. We could have been huge.
Yeah, whatever.
Call Chatterbox now on 0906 2020 2020. That's 0906 2020 2020. Call Chatterbox now.
Budweiser.
You stink!
At Comet you can buy this cool wall toaster, cordless kettle
and radio cassette Christmas gift pack
at this price. That's Comet Sense.
Enjoy it while you can, hotshot. Your days are numbered.
Louis.
Vicks, with its powerful Vicks Vapors. Calming, clearing, soothing. For a feeling of freer breathing. Vicks, for every breath you take.
Those frogs saying Budweiser is not enough. This is one of the greatest beers in the world. People want to know more. Take them out, my friend, and you'll be a national hero. They'll name a swamp after you. Now, when I say take them out, I don't mean take them to the movies. You understand?
If you're single, or even if you're not, you'll always be welcome at the Singles Bar. People call in every day looking to chat, get a date, or perhaps something more. You'll find the Singles Bar on 09069 12 13 12. And we have thousands of callers every day looking for fun. So why don't you join them on 09069 12 13 12. Call us now.
As the millennium approaches, the eyes of the world will be fixed upon the Millennium Countdown Clock at Greenwich Observatory, International Centre of Time. It will tell us all precisely when the new age begins. This clock has been designed and built by Accurist, so no one's celebrating the millennium until we say so.
What the? Whoa, whoa. I'm no electrician, but that has got to be dangerous.
Oh, my. Bud? Whoa. Louis.
Frankie, eventually every frog has to croak.
That's not funny.
I laugh when I'm sad.
My father kept his word this time. Sergei was given a hero's funeral. His ashes were placed in the Kremlin wall, and Zina was left unharmed.
My little housekeeper has become my little doorkeeper. Comrade doorkeeper. Where did you get that dress? It's too short. Cover your knees. And look at your legs. They're bare. Change the dress, put on long stockings. You weren't at Sergei's funeral. Why?
Well, I'm not feeling well.
I'll send the doctor.
No, it's nothing. Don't bother.
want to lose you too, so take care of yourself. Sergo didn't. Heart attack.
Yes. They're all taking off, like birds from a branch.
Yeah, like birds from a branch. Oh, forgive me, I'm a simple old woman. No, I don't understand anything. No, how did it suddenly turn out we have so many enemies?
Olga.
These are people we have known all our lives. They're army officers, loyal party men, your friends, Civil War heroes. Now, what is happening? Why are these people dying? Can you tell me? And why is everyone who knew my daughter, everyone who loved Nadia, disappearing, being arrested? Well, who is destroying them? Is it you?
Oh, for God's sake.
Why not arrest us all?
Yes, why not? Kova. Be silent, woman, be silent.
Why should I be silent? No, let him kill me, too. You drove my daughter to suicide. It was because of you she killed herself.
That's much better. You look better now. No, it's much, much better. Conrad, housekeeper. My little sparrow.
Accuse Bukharin. Accuse Bukharin. You have heard the other defendants testify
that you were part of a conspiracy under the direction of the arch-traitor Trotsky to overthrow the Soviet regime. To this end, numerous acts of terrorism have been committed, including the murder of Sergei Kirov and even the planning of the assassination of Comrade Stalin.
What a miserable gang of traitors. I've been listening in my office. What a miserable gang of traitors.
Confession is good for their souls.
And now Bukharin. The climax of our play.
We have all heard accused Yagoda state that you discussed with him a plot to murder Sergei Kirov.
I can't imagine why he said that. There has been no such discussion. I knew nothing of any scheme to murder Kirov.
You didn't break him. Hmm? How could you fail?
Coterie says. Coterie says.
You had months and months.
Let me have him for one night. I'll have him confessing he's the King of England.
I have done my duty. I've done everything you asked, even my own deputy. I myself disclosed.
Top officials under your command plotting against Stalin, and you supposedly are not involved?
Involved in what? You yourself told me to purge the security apparatus to get new people.
Yeah, Joe, you monster. Are you trying to tell me you deliberately allowed people to be purged, to be killed? What have you done, Joe? How can you possibly pay for your terrible crime?
I beg you to spare my wife and child.
On March 12, 1938, without warning, the German armies marched over the Austrian border. It was really only a full-scale invasion test, and Hitler rode in triumph into Vienna.
An ominous development.
You think so? I don't know. You've got to admire Hitler. He knows what he wants. He isn't afraid to go for it. He scares the British and French, but not Comrade Stalin.
He's a fascist, hard to destroy us. He says it over and over.
He says a lot of things. We all do. I think right now Hitler is looking east, and he's saying that Stalin, I can work with him. So is it done?
I gave it the personal touch.
Did he say anything?
He asked me to give you this.
Koba, why did you need my death? Why?
This is what Trotsky. How did he ever get through our fingers?
He's in Mexico City. In that house they converted into a fortress.
Why don't you get rid of him?
Yakov had gone to military school and joined the army, all in a vain attempt to win our father's approval.
You have a granddaughter.
So you're going to be an artillery officer?
Yes. We're calling her.
I hope you don't shell her on lines.
I will do my duty.
With all this stretch here in the higher commands, lieutenants like you may be commanding divisions.
I will do whatever is required of me.
Yakov.
So,
what is the situation here?
The Germans are attacking everything. Their panzers have penetrated our lines. Their air force dominates. We've lost almost 1,000 aircraft.
1,000? How can it be?
Most were destroyed on the ground.
On the ground?
Despite warnings and recommendations, they were left in forward positions.
No, counterattack. Here, 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 here.
You don't understand the situation. Our front is crumbling. Our forces are retreating, trying to avoid capture.
No capture, no retreat, no surrender. Attack. Beria! Beria! Bring up security troops. Shoot anyone trying to retreat.
Shoot our own men?
Yes, and we'll shoot you too, you incompetent fool!
Cuba! How can you say that? Who killed off all our best generals? 40,000 of our best officers, called them enemies of the people, had them shot? Who trusted Hitler? Who said he would not attack us? Voroshilov? No, it was you. It was you!
It's been 10 days. We're waiting for you. No one can do anything. Cuba, they love you. They're calling for you. Come, it's done. Save us. Save us. Save us.
Clean. They didn't kill you.
How could they? Without Stalin's orders.
Comrades, citizens, brothers and sisters, we are united in a patriotic war against an enemy who is trying to turn our people into slaves of the Germans. We will resist. We will hound and annihilate the enemy. We will show no mercy.
Hitler will go the way of Napoleon. To defeat. To despair. And to his death.
Your son Yakov has been taken prisoner.
I have no son, Yakov. No. What are we waiting for?
I hardly saw my father during the war. When he learned that Yakov was killed trying to escape from a German camp, he never told me. The Germans reached the gates of Moscow itself, and they surrounded Stalingrad too. When we finally pushed them back, 20 million of our people had died. It wasn't until near the end of the war, at the burial of my grandfather, that I saw my father again. It was the first time our family had been together for years.
At least Sergei knew. We did everything we could. The best doctor.
He died of silence. He didn't die of cancer. Kept his silence, where his friends, his comrades, were sent to prison, were killed.
Keep your mouth shut. What have you done, you old bitch? Look at my son, the general. Can you stand on your own feet, Vasily? And you, Svetlana, don't use that as an excuse to bring your Jew husband around. What did you teach them? You raised my son to be a drunk. And my daughter, do I have to say? What could I have expected? Did you teach your own daughter to be loyal to her husband? And you tried to turn him against me. Sergei, But he knew me. Sergei knew me. Get drunk, put him in jail for a while, sober him up. My family, what a curse they are.
I was three-time champion in this country.
Chatterbox now on 0906 2020 200. That's 0906 2020 200. Call Chatterbox now.
Is that indigestion or heartburn? Or worse, is it both? That's why Rennie developed new Rennie Duo. Its new liquid formula works in two ways. First, it soothes and helps control your heartburn. Then it goes on to neutralize your excess acid. New Rennie Duo. Powerful relief from indigestion and heartburn.
If you're single, or even if you're not, you'll always be welcome at the Singles Bar. People call in every day looking to chat, get a date, or perhaps something more. You'll find the Singles Bar on 09069 12 13 12. And we have thousands of callers every day looking for fun. So why don't you join them on 09069 12 13 12. Call us now.
I've got something you can't find just anywhere. It comes with £10 worth of free calls every month. And a low weekly charge. There's no written contract to worry about. And delivery is free to your home. It'll make a great little stocking filler. And they can even deliver by December the 23rd, ready for use on Christmas Day. So give First Line Mobile a jingle on 0800 183 2000 and get what you really want.
Guess what I found?
Every boy's dream.
My own giant robot.
And an adventure.
You can fly!
Bigger than anyone's imagination.
He only uses his powers for good.
It ate my car.
Bad robot!
The Iron Giant.
Ukrainian Republic thanks our liberator, the great comrade Stalin, best friend of all children. The Soviet Socialist Uzbek Republic thanks our great leader, the genius comrade Stalin, for victory.
We do not thank Comrade Stalin for our victory. We all know it was not Stalin who defeated the Germans.
Yes, Comrade Stalin, it was you.
We do not thank Comrade Stalin for our victory. Our thanks goes to the great Russian people. Your victory is a declaration to the world that the Russian people believe in a better future and stand ready to make whatever sacrifices are necessary to achieve the great construction of socialism.
In the winter of 1950, my father sent for me. I had heard that his memory was fading and that he was suspicious of everyone around him. Now he wanted to see me, and for the first time, his grandson, Josef. Wait, Josef. Give Mama your hand. Go to Grandpa.
Oy. Use Jewish eyes.
Look, who's that man?
Oh, you're someone who makes sure that everything's all right.
Don't ask so many questions.
Why?
Because there are things you don't have to know.
Why?
Why? A real Jew, huh? Oh, yeah. I always carry something for the squirrels. See? Now, here, now you feed him. Here, hold it out. You feed him. Feed him. You feed him. Hey? Hey? Ah. Here. Why that look? Hmm?
I want you to free Anna Bukharin.
It's a beautiful red tail, eh? He won't bite. Hmm? Mind your business. You haven't the slightest idea what you're talking about.
She's harmless.
You know about harmless. What the hell do you know?
I know people are disappearing again.
Enemies. Hmm? Hey. Here, go to your mama. They have no allegiance to the Soviet Union. Enemies.
Grandpa's nice.
Yes.
For a man your age, 73, you have a remarkable constitution.
The Caucasus man of 70 is still young. He can mount a horse or a woman.
But still, you have had these spells and perhaps angina. And your blood pressure is dangerously high.
Then you recommend?
As little work as possible.
Fruits, vegetables, injections of vitamins.
No injection.
I'll write a prescription.
No prescriptions. I have my own remedy. Go away, don't work, rest. Isn't that what they told Lenin? Thank you, Vinogradov. You may go now.
No. No.
Taste it, Lavrenti.
I don't like soup.
Taste it. Look how your father spends his nights with this boring bunch of old men. Where are you going?
Home.
No, stay. A promise from Papa, it will get more interesting. Oh, sit down. Sit. You eat. Lavrenti. You have some fun. Fun at the expense of this potato head. Dance the Nikita.
Dance.
Dance, Nikita. Dance. I hear you do the go back. Who told me? You do the go back. Don't be shy. Dance. We're getting old.
No.
No, you live forever.
I may have to. Who could follow Stalin? Who would follow Stalin? None of you is worthy. So, I'm going to rid myself of all of you. This soup you've eaten was poisoned. As you can see, I didn't touch mine.
You're joking, Colt. You have to be.
You see, fun. But you, all of you, what do you think would happen? Without Stalin? Come. Come in. Close the door. Come. Come in. Oy. There. No, I love your mother. Beautiful. But she was a foolish woman. She didn't understand the situation, what had happened, what I had to do. She listened to certain people and she turned against me. She became my enemy. And then she betrayed me. She killed herself. You killed yourself to strike a blow against me. Why?
It was your fault. You caused it.
You're just like her. You listen to my enemies, you just fall. They're poison, just as she did. You let them turn you against me. I know who they are. I'll take good care of them. And you think I don't know what you say? I know Stalin knows. I know what you say, what you do, who you screw. I know everything. Get out of here.
Papa.
This is a baby pig for you.
Thank you.
Well, two bad girls. Jimmy drew that. My time has come, Jimmy drew that. Jimmy drew that. Here, paste.
aren't you? Well, take hold of his hand properly.
I'm sorry. Hemorrhage in his brain. He can't breathe.
Let him suffer. Murdering bastard.
Forgive me.
Have you wondered? Why did Beria wait a day before calling the doctor?
Have I wondered?
You'll try to take power. It'll be as bad as before.
You said as bad.
I did.
You did? And have you thought about it? About what we'll say after Stalin dies?
About what?
His crimes?
What crimes?
Millions?
Nikita, you're too emotional. You talk too much. Who are we to judge Stalin? For him, we were a weak, backward country. Now look at us. We control half of Europe. The whole of China. We have the atomic bomb. We command respect. Without Stalin, it would have taken 20 years longer.
I don't believe that. Without the purges, the arrests, the killings, without Stalin, we could have been a great nation.
Our history required Stalin.
Papa.
Stop it, please. Can't you see the man is dead?
Я покидаю же, Господи. Я
It's from one epic to another in 20 minutes. Stalin gives way to prisoner cell block H. We're up to episode 573 if you're interested, and only comedy stands in the way. It's the spoof chat show to end them all. Nightstand with Dick Dietrich is next, and the subject is fashion victims, like you've never heard it before. Late night comedy, as they say, just doesn't get any more better.